The day I signed those divorce papers, my ex-wife Bridget looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're 45 years old, Colton. Starting over with nothing. Good luck with that." She stood there in the lawyer's office, pearl earrings glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights, the ones I had given her for our 10th anniversary. Her auburn hair pulled back perfectly, even on her worst days, and the contempt in her voice hit harder than any judge's gavel. She was right about the nothing part. She took the house in Scottsdale, the one with the pool where I taught our daughter Tessa how to swim when she was 4. Both cars went to her too, including my BMW, with 3 years of payments still left. The joint savings account we had built for 15 years? Gone. Hers now. Because her lawyer successfully argued I was financially unstable after losing my job. But none of that compared to the worst part. My 7-year-old daughter Tessa had to watch her daddy walk away with just 2 suitcases that morning when I moved out. Her tiny face pressed against the glass door, tears glistening, and she whispered, "Daddy, don't go." That moment hit me harder than anything else. The helplessness, the fear of failing her, it all crushed me. I wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, that this was only temporary. But I didn't know if it was true. I swallowed the lump in my throat and just smiled, because that's all I could do. As I drove away, feeling the weight of loss on my shoulders, I didn't know that a tiny $50 bank account, opened in 1980 and long forgotten, was about to change everything. It was buried in the past, unnoticed, but it held the key to rebuilding our life. Before I continue, I want to know you're here with me. Comment below where you're watching from. It reminds me that I'm not alone sharing this story. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. After moving out that morning, I spent the next few weeks trying to piece together a life from nothing. 45 years old, a divorce, no job, no car, no house, and the crushing weight of knowing my little girl was watching all of it happen. Each day felt like a battle, not just with the world, but with my own self-doubt. How do you start over when everything you built seems gone? I found a small apartment, barely enough room for Tessa and me, with peeling paint and a creaky floor that complained under every step. But I didn't care. We needed a place to call our own, somewhere we could breathe. I bought only what was absolutely necessary. A small bed, a table, a chair for Tessa, and a lamp to light our nights. Every penny counted. Every choice mattered. To survive, I took a job at a local hardware store. Long hours stocking shelves, helping customers, lifting heavy boxes, physical labor I hadn't done in years. The work was grueling, but it kept us afloat. At night, after Tessa went to bed, I scoured job boards, hoping to find something that could use the skills I had honed over decades. It felt humiliating, starting from scratch at my age, but the thought of giving up never crossed my mind. Not while Tessa needed me, evenings were the hardest. Tessa would curl up on the small couch and ask me questions about why Mommy left, why we didn't have our old life anymore. I would sit there, holding her, stroking her hair, and whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. "Daddy will fix everything. I promise." Those nights, I began to remember the stories my parents used to tell me about saving, planning for the future, and never underestimating small beginnings. And that's when it hit me. I might have nothing now, but maybe the past had left me a secret I hadn't discovered yet. I remembered the old bank account my father had opened for me in 1980. I had almost forgotten about it. A tiny $50 deposit he had made when I was a child, tucked away and completely overlooked. I didn't know the balance, but I felt a flicker of hope. Could this forgotten account really make a difference? Could it be the lifeline that Tessa and I needed? I spent days contacting the bank, verifying records, filling out paperwork, proving my identity. It felt like a race against time. Every day I would come home exhausted, Tessa's small hand in mine, and I would tell her stories to keep her spirits up. We talked about building a new life, one where we didn't just survive, we thrived. And as I worked through the paperwork, my mind raced with possibilities. Even a modest sum, compounded over decades, could be enough to give us a fresh start. I imagined buying a small home, securing Tessa's future, and finally reclaiming a sense of dignity that had been stripped from me. Before I continue, I want to ask you, have you ever discovered something from your past that changed your life? Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. Little did I know that this tiny bank account, seemingly insignificant, was about to turn our lives upside down. And not just in terms of money, but in the lessons it would teach me about patience, faith, and resilience. The day I finally got the call from the bank, my heart was pounding. My hands trembled as I held the phone, waiting to hear the balance of the account that had been untouched since 1980. The teller read the numbers slowly, as if savoring the moment. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The $50 my father had deposited had grown, through decades of compounding interest, into a sum that was far beyond what I had dared to imagine. Tessa was playing nearby, her laughter echoing in our tiny apartment. I wanted to scream with joy, to celebrate, but I held it in. Instead, I sat down at the table and wrote the numbers on a scrap of paper, staring at them like they were a secret code from the universe. Could this really be real? Could this forgotten account, a relic from a long ago past, truly change our lives? I decided to do the only responsible thing. I needed to understand it fully before making any moves. I studied the account statements, cross-referenced interest rates over the decades, and realized that the growth had been exponential. My father, even in his quiet way, had given me a tool that could not only save us from financial ruin, but give Tessa the life she deserved. But hope, as it often does, came with doubt. I worried about making the wrong decision, about risking what little stability we had. Should I invest it, save it, use it to buy a house? The weight of responsibility pressed on me heavily. I had always been careful with money. But this was different. This was the culmination of decades of patience, foresight, and trust from someone who believed in me even before I believed in myself. In the evenings, after Tessa went to bed, I would sit at our tiny kitchen table and calculate, plan, and dream. I imagined a home with a backyard where she could play freely, a school she could attend without worry, and a life that wasn't overshadowed by struggle. Every calculation, every scenario made my resolve stronger. I would not waste this chance. Of course, the process wasn't straightforward. There were hurdles, bank forms, identity verifications, and tax complications. Each obstacle was a test of patience and persistence. I remember one night staying up until 2 a.m., exhausted, frustrated, and wondering if all this effort would pay off. And then I would glance at a photo of Tessa sleeping peacefully, and my doubts would vanish. This was bigger than me. This was for her. I want to ask you, if you discovered a hidden fortune from your past, how would you use it? Comment below where you're watching from, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button for more stories like this, because our journey is just beginning. As the days passed, I began to see a pattern. The account, while small at first, had been perfectly managed, untouched, and allowed to grow naturally. It was a gift of foresight from my father. A silent message that even small efforts, compounded over time, could lead to extraordinary outcomes. And with this newfound hope, I started to rebuild not just our finances, but our spirits. Every late night, every calculated decision, brought me closer to a life that Tessa and I had only dreamed about. And yet, I knew the real test was still ahead. Turning this unexpected blessing into lasting change, and making sure that no one, not even our past struggles, could take it away from us. It took me 3 weeks to finally get full access to the account. 3 weeks of waiting, phone calls, paperwork, and endless verification. Every day, I would look at Tessa and wonder if she understood what this could mean for us. I couldn't tell her yet. Not until I was sure. The day finally came. I logged into the online portal, my hands shaking, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. There it was, the balance. My eyes widened. I had expected a nice surprise, maybe enough to cover our rent for a year or two. But this was more than I could have dreamed. The $50 my father had deposited over 40 years ago had grown into a sum that could change our lives completely. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, trying to let it sink in. For a moment I laughed, a shaky, almost hysterical laugh. Tessa, sitting at the kitchen table doing her homework, looked up at me. "Daddy, what's so funny?" she asked. I smiled, holding back tears. "Nothing, pumpkin, just nothing." But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. It was hope. It was freedom. It was the future my daughter deserved. I called the bank to confirm everything, triple-checked the interest rates, and finally understood how compounding had worked in our favor. My father had left me a lesson as much as a gift. Small, consistent effort, left alone over time, could grow into something extraordinary. And now, it was my responsibility to use it wisely. I took a moment to breathe. Really breathe. The tension, the months of struggle, the nights of worrying about rent and bills, they all melted away for a second. And then the weight came back. Because with this gift came choices. Big choices. Should I invest? Buy a home for us? Save it for Tessa's education? Or use it to start a new life entirely? Each option carried risks, responsibilities, and consequences. I realized that this was no longer just about money. It was about building a future and making sure we never had to feel helpless again. I want to ask you something here. If you discovered a fortune you didn't know existed, how would you feel? Excited? Scared? Overwhelmed? Comment below where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Because the story is just getting started. That night, I sat at the table with Tessa. She was tired from school, yawning, but she leaned against me anyway. I thought about everything we had been through, losing our home, struggling to pay bills, those nights where I didn't know if we would eat. And now everything was different. A small $50 account from 1980 had the power to undo years of hardship, and yet, I knew this was only the beginning. This discovery was the spark, but turning it into a lasting change, a real future for Tessa and me, would take wisdom, patience, and courage. Every decision I made from this point on mattered more than ever. I closed my laptop that night, letting the weight of the discovery sink in, and for the first time in a long time I felt a glimmer of hope. A real solid hope, one that could carry us through the storms of the past and into a future that was finally ours. The next morning, I woke up early. Before Tessa stirred from her bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, long before I took my first sip. I stared at the balance on the bank statement again. It felt surreal. 40 years of growth, all from a $50 deposit. My father had left me this gift, quietly, knowing one day I would need it. And now that day had come. I didn't rush to make decisions. Instead, I let myself breathe. Let myself imagine the possibilities. Could we finally move into a home that was ours? One with space for Tessa to play, room for us to grow? Could we pay off debts, start saving for college, maybe even take a real vacation for the first time in years? The thought made my chest tighten. This was more than money. This was freedom. But with freedom came doubt. How could I make the right choice? I had lived most of my adult life managing finances carefully, working tirelessly, and surviving with nothing. And now, suddenly we had options. What if I made a mistake? What if I squandered the opportunity? I felt the weight of responsibility like never before. Every decision mattered, not just for me, but for Tessa. I reached out to financial advisors, slowly piecing together a plan. Investments, savings, emergency funds. Every call, every consultation was another step towards security. And yet, the human part of me, the emotional part, kept reminding me of the struggles we had survived. The sleepless nights, the bills piled high, the fear of losing it all again. I couldn't forget that, and I wouldn't allow myself to get carried away by greed or impulse. Tessa wandered into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, what are you doing?" she asked sleepily. I smiled, trying to mask my anxiety. Planning, pumpkin. Planning our future. She didn't understand the full weight of the moment, but her small presence reminded me why every choice mattered. Every decision I made now would shape her world. I want to ask you something. Have you ever had a chance to start over, completely from scratch, with a second chance you didn't expect? Comment below where you're watching from. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, because what happens next is going to blow your mind. Over the following weeks, I began to implement our plan carefully. Step by step, I bought a modest home in a safe neighborhood. We moved Tessa's few belongings in slowly, giving her time to adjust. Every corner of that house became a symbol of hope. I started setting aside funds for her education, planning for emergencies, and even allowing myself small moments of indulgence that I had denied for years. Evenings became our sacred time. Tessa and I would sit together, dreaming about the future, playing games, and laughing freely. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of despair lift. And yet the story wasn't over. This small $50 account, long forgotten, was only the beginning. It had given us a chance, but it would also test me in ways I couldn't yet imagine. Each night, I reflected on what my father had done for me, and I realized the greatest gift wasn't just the money, it was the lesson. Patience, foresight, and faith. He had left me the tools to build a future, not just a temporary fix. And now, armed with that wisdom and this unexpected fortune, I was ready to take the next steps towards securing a life for Tessa that no hardship could ever take away. The day we moved into our new home, Tessa ran through the front door, laughing as if she had never experienced anything but happiness. I carried her favorite blanket and her small box of toys, watching her eyes widen at every corner of the house. For a moment, I allowed myself to forget the years of struggle. The nights I went to bed wondering how we would survive. The constant worry gnawing at my chest. This house wasn't just walls and a roof. It was a symbol that even in the darkest times, a small seed, like that $50 bank account, could grow into something powerful. And now we had room to breathe, to live, and to dream again. I spent the next few days organizing, setting up furniture, and making sure every little detail was perfect for Tessa. Each corner of the house felt like a fresh start. Her laughter echoed through the rooms, chasing away the shadows of the past. And every time she smiled, I felt the weight of every sacrifice, every struggle, every sleepless night, melt just a little more. But rebuilding wasn't just about physical space. It was about emotional stability, trust, and security. I knew I had to teach Tessa the value of patience, responsibility, and the power of planning. That small account had done more than provide money. It had given me a lesson my father had passed down silently. I started involving her in small decisions, showing her how to budget for her own allowance, how to save for the things she wanted, and how to appreciate what we had. Even in the quiet moments, I reflected on the journey. I thought about my father's foresight, the struggles I had endured, and how every choice I had made brought us here. It was humbling, and it was empowering. I felt a sense of gratitude unlike anything I had experienced before. Life had tested us, and now we had the tools to thrive. I want to pause for a moment and ask you, if you discovered a hidden opportunity that could change your life, how would you use it? Share in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow Tessa and my journey. It's a story you won't want to miss. Over the next few months, I carefully managed our finances. I set aside funds for emergencies, invested a portion wisely, and made sure our daily needs were met without stress. Tessa's schooling became a priority, and we finally had the freedom to explore extracurricular activities she had always dreamed of. Piano lessons, swimming classes, and weekend trips to the park without worrying about costs. Through this process, I realized the true impact of what had happened. This was about more than money. It was about stability, confidence, and freedom. It was about showing my daughter that even when life knocks you down, there's always a way to rise again. And it was about honoring the lesson my father had left behind. Small efforts, maintained over time, can change the course of an entire life. By the time the sun set each evening, Tessa and I would sit on the porch, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink, feeling a peace that had been absent for years. And in those quiet moments, I knew that our journey wasn't just about financial recovery. It was about reclaiming our lives, our dignity, and our hope. Just when I thought life was finally settling into a steady rhythm, challenges began to appear, subtle at first, almost like shadows creeping at the edges of a bright day. It wasn't money or logistics this time. It was the unexpected emotional weight of starting over, the kind you don't see until you're deep into it. Tessa, my little girl who had always been so resilient, began to ask questions I hadn't anticipated. Questions about her mother, about why we had lost so much, why her life had changed so suddenly. Every question pierced me, reminding me of the absence we had endured, the void we had lived in for years. And yet I didn't shy away. I answered carefully, slowly, letting her know the truth without burdening her too heavily. Meanwhile, managing our new finances and life took more effort than I had imagined. I discovered that the world doesn't pause just because you've inherited a blessing. There were bills, taxes, and unexpected expenses that seemed to pop up at the worst possible moments. I had to make decisions, some small, some monumental, that could affect not just our comfort, but our long-term stability. Every choice mattered. I remember one particular evening, Tessa curled up with her favorite book, while I sat at the kitchen table, running numbers, making spreadsheets, and trying to forecast our future. The weight of responsibility pressed on me like a storm, and yet I felt a strange strength rising within me. I realized that the hardships, the struggles, the years of sacrifice, they had all prepared me for this moment. I was ready. Then came the first major test. A medical emergency with Tessa's beloved pet, a tiny dog she had rescued, forced me to spend more than I had planned. I had to make a choice, delay treatment or use a portion of the account immediately. My heart raced. Could I make the right decision? Could I balance love, necessity, and foresight? I chose love. I paid for the treatment without hesitation, and when Tessa hugged me, her small arms wrapped tight, her voice trembling with relief, I realized that wealth isn't measured just in numbers. It's measured in the lives you touch, the trust you earn, and the lessons you pass on. But life wasn't done testing me. There were distant relatives, unexpected tax notices, and even old acquaintances resurfacing, curious about how I had managed to turn my life around. Some were supportive, some opportunistic. Every interaction reminded me that with newfound fortune comes attention, both good and bad, and I had to navigate it all carefully, deliberately, with Tessa's well-being at the center. I want to ask you, have you ever faced a challenge when you finally thought everything was perfect? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about resilience, hope, and second chances. Through every trial, every late night, every decision, I felt the lessons of the past guiding me. My father's $50 deposit had given us a starting point, but it was our perseverance, our careful planning, and our love for each other that truly shaped our future. By the end of that challenging week, I realized that life doesn't hand you miracles without testing your strength, and sometimes, the moments that scare you the most become the ones that prove your resilience, determination, and capacity to grow. Weeks passed, and Tessa and I began to settle into a rhythm that felt almost normal. But normal in this life had a new meaning. Every day brought a mix of joy, lessons, and small challenges that reminded me just how fragile and precious our journey truly was. I had this account now, this life-changing inheritance from my father, and yet I realized that money alone could not create happiness. It could open doors, yes, but it was our choices, our actions, and the love we shared that would define our future. I spent hours each night planning, not just for the next month or the next year, but for a long-term strategy to secure Tessa's future. Education, investments, emergency funds, a home we could truly call our own, all of it required careful thought. I wanted to make sure every decision I made honored the gift my father had left me, the lessons he had silently taught through his foresight. And yet, even with careful planning, uncertainty lingered. Life has a way of reminding you that control is an illusion. Unexpected repairs, rising bills, and small crises kept testing my patience and resolve. But through it all, I kept Tessa at the center. I wanted her to see not just the comfort money could provide, but the discipline, responsibility, and resilience that comes from building a life carefully and thoughtfully. There were moments when I caught her watching me, her small eyes full of curiosity and admiration. I realized that I was not just shaping our present, I was shaping her perception of the world, her understanding of perseverance, and her belief in herself. That alone made every late night, every decision, every small sacrifice worth it. I want to ask you here, have you ever had to rebuild your life from scratch? How did you stay motivated? Comment below and let me know where you're watching from. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this, because Tessa and I are just getting started. Slowly, day by day, we started to feel the effects of the choices I was making. The account, once a small forgotten sum, was now a tool to build stability, security, and opportunity. I began small, fixing the house, setting aside funds for school, and slowly creating a life that felt safe. But the real growth was internal. We were learning how to thrive, not just survive. Evenings became our sacred time. We would sit together, Tessa reading her books while I organized plans for the next day. Sometimes we would talk about dreams, vacations, hobbies, and even what kind of home she imagined growing up in. These conversations reminded me that while money could open doors, love, attention, and guidance were what truly built a foundation for life. And through all of it, I felt my father's presence. Not literally, of course, but in the way his foresight had given me a starting point, in the lessons he left through a simple $50 account, and in the understanding that patience, planning, and persistence could overcome years of struggle. I wanted Tessa to carry that lesson forward, just as I had learned it so late in life. Every decision now was deliberate, careful, and filled with purpose. And yet, as much as we had achieved, I knew that the final chapters of our story were still ahead. The challenges, the opportunities, and the life-changing moments were just beginning. But one thing was clear. We were no longer at the mercy of circumstance. We were building our own destiny, one thoughtful decision at a time. As the weeks turned into months, Tessa and I began to experience the true impact of that small $50 bank account. What started as a forgotten deposit had grown into so much more than financial security. It became a symbol of hope, resilience, and the power of foresight. Every morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. I knew that my decisions now affected not only my life, but my daughter's entire future. I began setting long-term goals, saving for her college, investing in a home that would truly be ours, and creating a safety net that would protect us from unexpected hardships. Each choice felt heavier than any decision I had made in the past, but also more meaningful. I watched Tessa grow in confidence. She began excelling in school, trying new activities, and dreaming without limits. Her laughter filled our home, a sound I had almost forgotten amidst the stress and uncertainty of our past life. It was a reminder that what I was doing wasn't just about money. It was about giving her a life she deserved, full of opportunity and love. There were still challenges. Unexpected medical bills, minor repairs in the house, and even the occasional unwelcome advice from distant relatives reminded me that life never stops testing you. But each obstacle became a lesson, reinforcing my understanding of careful planning, resilience, and prioritizing what truly mattered. And with each challenge we overcame, I felt a quiet pride in how far we had come. I remember one evening, Tessa curled up beside me on the couch, her small hand holding mine. She looked up at me with those wide, trusting eyes and said, "Daddy, I'm happy now." My heart swelled. All the sleepless nights, the worry, and the painstaking decisions had led to this moment. That simple statement reminded me why every choice, every effort, and every sacrifice mattered. I want to ask you, if you had a second chance at life, how would you use it? Share in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, because lessons like these are worth hearing. As the months continued, I found myself planning not just for survival, but for growth. I started thinking about experiences, travel, and memories we could create together. I invested in education funds for Tessa, set aside funds for emergencies, and even allowed myself small joys that I had denied for so long. Through it all, I realized that the greatest impact of the hidden account wasn't the money itself. It was the freedom, the ability to rebuild, and the opportunity to teach my daughter resilience, patience, and the value of planning. This discovery didn't just give us financial stability. It gave us hope, security, and a sense of empowerment that no struggle could take away. By the end of this period, our home wasn't just a place to live, it was a sanctuary. Our lives had transformed, and I knew that every lesson learned from my father's foresight and every careful decision I had made would carry Tessa into a future filled with possibility and promise. The day finally came when I could sit back and really take in what had happened. Tessa was playing in the backyard, her laughter ringing through the air, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace that went deeper than anything I had known. The $50 account my father had opened in 1980 had done more than provide money. It had changed our lives entirely. I reflected on the journey we had taken. The heartbreak of divorce, the loss of stability, the nights of uncertainty and fear, they had all been necessary steps that led us to this moment. That tiny seed my father had planted had grown into a foundation strong enough to rebuild our lives. And through it all, Tessa had been my reason, my motivation, and my reminder of what truly mattered. Looking forward, I knew our story was only beginning. We had stability now, yes, but more importantly, we had lessons learned. Lessons about patience, planning, and perseverance. Lessons about turning small opportunities into life-changing moments. Lessons about never giving up, even when life seemed to have closed every door. And so, as I watched my daughter run through the yard, I whispered a silent thank you to my father. Thank you for the foresight, for the wisdom, and for giving us a chance. And I promised myself that I would pass those lessons on to Tessa, ensuring that she too would understand the power of persistence, love, and careful planning. I want to leave you with this. Life can surprise you in ways you never expect. Sometimes, the smallest gestures, the tiniest savings, or the quietest acts of love can have the biggest impact. Always pay attention, be patient, and never underestimate the power of what seems insignificant today. It might just change your life tomorrow. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring tales of resilience, hope, and life-changing discoveries. And comment below where you're watching from. I'd love to hear from you.